Hi everybody. Since we didn't have class today, I thought it would be good that if we just go ahead and do this lecture anyway, because it's really important stuff that you need to know, and I didn't want to miss another week. So today we're talking about the powers of Congress, which is really important. Article 1, Section 8, you can see it here on the board behind me. It lists the enumerated powers of Congress, and that means like numbered or listed out. So it states specifically what Congress is allowed to do. So let's get started. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, so that's the very first paragraph, says, and you might want to even open up your Constitution Journal, and you can just do this right along with the lecture, and then you'll have 2 assignments done. So I'm reading out of my handy dandy pocket Constitution. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 says, the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. But all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. Okay, so this clause gives the Congress power to tax. Duties, imposts, excises are all taxes. So, Clause 1 is tax. Okay? Then it also gives them the power to spend that money. If they collect the taxes, then they have the power to spend the money. It's saying, Congress, you can spend this money for whatever you want. Well, not whatever you want, but whatever they deem necessary for the general welfare of the United States. Okay? So, power number 2 is spend. This clause, I'm going to put a little note here. Clause 1. This is also known as the General Welfare Clause because of that wording in there, that they may tax and spend according to what they deem is necessary for the general welfare. So this is important because this has been a subject of debate. So make sure you write this down. Okay. General Welfare Clause. Okay. So we got 2 powers listed here. We have 20 powers to go through. So we'll try to do this quickly. Clause 2, to borrow money on the credit of the United States. Borrow money. Easy. Okay? And who do they borrow money from? Other governments, typically. Where else are they going to get the amount of money they need to borrow? From other governments. Okay. Our national debt right now is like around $20 trillion, which is huge. There's only like $66 trillion in circulation in the whole world. So to owe $22 trillion is bad for our economy. So just keep that in mind. Next clause. To regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and within the Indian tribes. Okay, so the next power that Congress has is to regulate commerce. Okay? Okay? Hopefully you all know what commerce is. Commerce is just the sale and purchase of goods and services. So it's just industry, well, not industry, but moving goods back and forth and exchanging money and stuff, okay? Excuse me. All right, I'm going to erase this board, and our next clause is the power to coin money, regulate the value thereof, and a foreign coin, excuse me, and fix the standard of weights and measures. Okay, so this is pretty. Sorry, I missed a clause. No, I didn't. Yes, I did. The next one after the Commerce Clause is to establish a uniform rule of naturalization and uniform laws on the subject of bankruptcies throughout the United States. Okay, naturalization means how someone becomes a citizen. So the Congress can decide the rules for people to come into our country who want to become American citizens. They get to decide the rules on how they can do that. Okay, so I'm going to erase this. Okay, power number 5 is rules for citizenship. Okay, number 6 is to establish a uniform rule. Oh, sorry. Number 6 is also included in that same clause, and that's bankruptcy laws. So they can figure out how, if somebody decides they don't have enough money to pay all their debts, instead of just going to debtor's prison, we have this awesome thing called bankruptcy, which means you can basically be let out of your debts and say, I don't, you liquidate whatever assets you have and pay off what you can, and then you can say, okay, I don't owe anything else. And it's not like a great thing, but it's better than owing money forever and people suing you. So if you declare bankruptcy, then nobody can sue you for debts that you owe. You do have to rebuild your good reputation, and it won't be as easy for you to borrow money again, but at least it gives people an out if they need it. So, bankruptcy laws. That's what the C. Okay. Our next one is the power to coin money, regulate the value thereof, and a foreign coin, and fix the standard of weights and measures. So they have the power to coin, meaning make, and regulate money. How much is out in circulation? What are the rules for the money? Who can make the money? Everything. Okay. So rules for coin and regulate money. Let's write it that way. Okay. Oh, and then also in there, I'm not going to, oh, no, I will. And then the next power that was listed in that same clause is that Congress has the power to standardize weights and measures, which is important because if I was in Georgia and I wanted to sell a barrel of sugar to Massachusetts, well, Massachusetts says that a barrel of sugar is only this big, but Georgia says a barrel of sugar is this big, then what I sell to Massachusetts, they're going to get a great deal, right? Because they said, I want a barrel of sugar, and it was huge, much bigger than they were expecting, so they got a super great deal. Well, then the same goes for Georgia. If I wanted to buy something from Massachusetts, I wanted to buy a barrel of, let's say, rum from Massachusetts, and they send me this tiny little barrel, I'm going to be really mad that I didn't get what I thought I was owed. So Congress has the power to make everything standard. A barrel must be this size. That's it. Okay, through every state. That's what that means. Okay. Hopefully you guys can read my writing. Okay, next one. Congress has the power to provide for the punishment of counterfeiting the securities and current coin of the United States. So, if they have the power to regulate money, make the rules on who can make it, if somebody else decides to make it, that's called counterfeiting. If they don't have the authority from Congress to make money, then that's called counterfeiting, and Congress can punish you for that. So, the ninth power that they have is to punish counterfeiting. I hope you guys can read that. Okay. Next power. To establish post offices and post roads. That's easy. We know what that means. So I'm going to erase this. Hopefully you guys got it written down. Establish a postal system. Okay, there we go. Next one. This is kind of a cool one. To promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. This is the power to grant patents and copyrights. If you write a paper, write a book, invent something, you have the right to say that I own that invention. It's called intellectual property. I own it because I thought of it, I made it. And Congress can grant you a copyright or a patent to prove that this is your invention, your creation, and it belongs to you. So no one else can copy it without being punished, basically. If somebody copies your patent and makes like a slight tweak to it, then it's kind of up for grabs. But if it's exactly like what you created, then it's yours and no one else can copy it. Sorry, my board's a little wobbly. Laws. Copyrights and patents. Patents. Okay, hope you can see that. Sorry, my allergies are really bad this week. Okay, next one. To constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court. Tribunals are courts. So inferior means less than or less powerful than. So they can set up, what are they called? Federal courts, but that are less powerful, I guess, like a step below the Supreme Court, which is important because if they didn't have these like local courts, they call them district courts, if they didn't have those, then it would be, the Supreme Court would be totally bogged down with cases all the time. So the lesser courts help to alleviate some of the caseload on the Supreme Court. So right, number 13. To define and punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas and offenses against the laws of nations. Okay, that makes sense. Punish crimes on the high seas. The high seas are, they're not states' territory, so somebody has to regulate if a crime is committed on the high seas. A pirate comes and, steals your ship or attacks you, whatever. So somebody has to punish that, so that's another power of Congress. I'm running out of chalk. Okay, next one is to... Oh, these are switched. Are they? No. Okay, the next one is that Congress has the power to declare war, grant letters of marque and reprisal, and make rules concerning captures on land and water. Okay, so this is important to remember that Congress is the one who has the power to declare war, not the president, okay? And letters of marque. Sorry, I didn't. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head what marque means. Letters of marque. But I can't really remember. So let me see if I have it written down here somewhere. Oh, okay. So a letter of marque is like a document from the Congress that gives the holder of that document authority from Congress to wage war against an enemy of the United States. So I don't know when we would use that in modern times, but I'm sure it still gets used. I don't know. Okay, next one. To raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years. So they get to decide the budget. They get to raise an army, but that money's only good for 2 years. That budget is only good for 2 years, and then every 2 years they have to reevaluate and ask for money again and say, oh, well, actually we need this much. So that's their next power, to raise money for an army. And this is a good power because if we remember, the Articles of Confederation did not allow for this. I mean, they were supposed to have power to raise money for an army, but there was no way to enforce it. So now with the Constitution, they can actually enforce. We have the power to say, we're going to tax you so we can pay our army, okay? Raise and finance armies. Can't stretch over that far. Okay. And armies is including nowadays it includes, Coast Guard and Air Force and Marines and National Guard. Well, National Guard I think is paid for by states, but I'm trying to think what other branch. Navy. Okay. Okay. Our next power is to make rules for the government and regulation of the land and naval forces. So this is just making rules for the army. Okay, so Congress is the one who has rules, makes rules. Okay. Next power. To provide and maintain a navy. This was a newish kind of a thing for the government, because before we had an army, but we didn't have like an official navy. Our first navy was like ships that George Washington like commissioned and said, hey, would you go out and do this mission for me? There was no like real official navy, so now we're going to have an official navy. Sorry, my phone's ringing. Let's see if I can find it. Oh, and sorry, I feel like I'm missing something here. Maintain a navy. Where am I missing this? Provide and maintain a navy. Okay. All right. Let's see. To provide for the calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. That's our next power. So they can call up the militia and say, for different reasons. One is for to execute the laws of the Union. So if a state isn't obeying the law, the Congress can send in the military into that state and basically take control of that state until they get things settled out and they're obeying the law, okay? Suppress insurrections. Okay, so the Civil War was a good example of that. An insurrection is a rebellion against the federal government. So they can call up the military and say, okay, we need to put a stop to this insurrection. And to repel invasions. Obviously, if another country is trying to invade us, the Congress needs to be able to call up the military to protect us from that invasion. Okay, so actually I think I have 21 powers, but let's see. Call up militias. We're just going to write that. Now remember, in these days, they were referring to like the different state militias. Each state had their own militia that was, paid for by the state, but the Congress could call them up. Now we have, the National Army. We still have state militias. The National Guard is our state militia now, because each state has a branch, has its own guard forces. Okay, our next power, excuse me, to exercise exclusive legislation, lawmaking, in all cases whatsoever, over such district, not exceeding 10 miles square, as may, by cession of particular states and the acceptance of Congress, become the seat of the government of the United States, and to exercise like authority over all places purchased by the consent of the legislature of the state in which the same shall be, for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. Okay. That sounds like a lot. There's two powers listed in there. So the first one is to administer the seat of government, what is our seat of our national government? Washington, D.C. So they get to set up the nation's capital, basically is what it says, and it has to be no bigger than 10 miles square, and they use funds to maintain it, build whatever buildings they need, okay? So that's our 19th power. Administer the seat of government. And then also in that same clause, which is clause 17, the second power listed in there is to administer federal lands. So they have the right to build buildings and basically maintain whatever federal lands that they claim as for use for the government, which is it can be outside of the nation's capital. We can have like land we might need for a federal court or a national park or whatever, okay? So that's, or most importantly, military bases. That's a big one, okay? So that's administer federal lands. I hope you can read that. Administer federal lands. Okay. And then our last one is really important. This is to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department or officer thereof. Basically, I'm going to erase this real quick. So this is our 20th power, or 21st power, and it's to pass laws to implement the above powers. My chalk is almost gone again. Okay. Now, the important words in this clause are to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper. This is called the necessary and proper clause. Okay? So, this means Congress can make any laws they feel they need to make, to be able to do the powers that they've been given by the Constitution. So, this one has been under a lot of debate. Initially, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, they all agreed that this meant that the Congress was limited. Oh no, sorry. Let me go back to, necessary and proper, that's kind of a objective term, right? That's kind of open. Well, if this House of Congress thinks that it's necessary and proper to write a certain piece of legislation, but this House of Congress thinks it's not necessary and proper, well, there can be some debate, right? So it's all kind of open, like, what does necessary and proper mean? It can mean a lot of things, right, to a lot of different people, and maybe instituting, like, some kind of welfare program to use tax dollars to help people who are underprivileged is considered necessary and proper. And maybe some people don't think it is because this is America and you should provide for yourself. You can see how there would be a lot of ambiguity in that clause. So this is why this one's been like super controversial. Okay? We're going to go way back to the very first clause, the one we called the General Welfare Clause. This one has also caused a lot of controversy. Originally, James Madison and Thomas Jefferson were on the side that the General Welfare Clause meant that the government was limited, the Congress was limited to just the enumerated powers, just those powers that we listed. They couldn't do anything else except those powers that were listed and what they deemed necessary for the general welfare of the nation as a whole. Okay. So the intent of that clause was to make sure that no like special interest groups or states or local units were getting federal funding for whatever. They didn't want federal tax dollars going to local interests. Alexander Hamilton was initially on board with that. He was like, oh yeah, this is good. We need to limit the government. But then as soon as he became the Secretary of State, he totally changed his perspective and was like, oh no, we should be able to use federal tax dollars for anything that we think is for the general welfare. So also that one's kind of ambiguous too. So let me tell you, let's see here. It was kind of like under debate like that until like 1936. So like 150 years, right? People debated, well, what's general welfare? So then finally 1936 rolls around and there's a bill that came up about agriculture and subsidizing farmers. I can't remember all the details, but it was called the Butler, United States versus Butler. And Justice Roberts was one of the Supreme Court justices. And he wrote the final decision on this, and he wrote that basically that to authorize expenditure of public monies for public purposes. Sorry, let me start over. He wrote that. He wanted to make sure there was no further debate on this issue, that we would settle it once and for all. Is Congress limited or not limited in their powers? And so he wrote that the Jefferson-Madison view, there's no further ground for the Jefferson-Madison view that the government should be limited. He felt that they should be unlimited in what they can interpret the general welfare to be. And he said, as a positive judicial mandate that the General Welfare Clause allows Congress to authorize expenditure of public monies for public purposes and is not limited by the direct grants of legislative power found in the Constitution. So that settled it once and for all, that the government can decide whatever they think is any law that they feel is going to be good for the general welfare, whatever it may be, can be, they can make that law. And one of the things I can think of right off the top of my head is FEMA. And if you've ever heard of FEMA, it's the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and or administration. I can't remember what the A stands for. But they've been set up to help when there's like a natural disaster in the United States. And now, anytime there's like a hurricane, a tornado rips through somewhere, a big giant flood, that state can declare a state of emergency, and then they can call up the federal government and say, hey, we need to get FEMA in here. So that means federal tax dollars are going to go to that state to help them clean up and help them with humanitarian aid in the light of that disaster. Well, that's maybe a good thing, but according to James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, that should never have happened. There should be no federal dollars going to state aid. That should be totally up to the states to take care of themselves. But because of the ambiguity in the wording of the Constitution, in the fact that is this necessary and proper, and also is it for the general welfare, maybe it could be. There was, a hurricane in Texas. Well, that's affected all the oil wells. Okay, so oil refineries, sorry. Oil refineries were shut down. Well, the whole nation uses oil. So for FEMA to come in and to give federal money to the state of Texas to help aid them in their recovery from the hurricane, that could be, considered good for the general welfare of our nation, because it's going to help every state that buys oil that has its oil refined in Texas. So that's why we need judges, so they can interpret these things and say, okay, this is constitutional, or no, this isn't constitutional. And sometimes we agree with the judge's decisions, and sometimes we don't. But that's the way it goes. So, sorry I talked for so long. I hope that you guys are able to use these notes for your Constitution journal. And, homework. That's what I forgot. Here's your homework for this week. See if I can get it off of here. Whew. I already wrote it down. Hope you can see this. So your opinion paper is, does Congress have too much power or not enough? And I hope you can see that. I'm trying to look. Okay, and then your Constitution, or your Constitution journal assignment is on here also. Articles 5 through 7. So I will just go ahead and type this onto the blog so I can post it, and then you guys can have a little more time to read it. And hope you have a great day, and I will see you on Thursday. Thanks.